Hello and welcome to the Run As Well podcast with me, Rick Pearson.
And me, Ben Hobson.
Today we're speaking with author Colin Renton about running and wine.
What a fantastic combo.
Yeah, some of my favourite things actually, as it happens.
Two of them.
Yeah.
Two very much. You are actually a big fan of combining running and alcohol. You've established a few things. We're doing it's half pint half.
Yeah, I've done
soon.
the half pint half, which is, is it responsible? It's probably not responsible, but it's been good fun.
It depends how long you take.
Yeah, pick a traffic-free route, is what I say. But yeah, it's 13 half pints and 13 miles. So that's
just all be responsible adults there. Drink responsibly. That's the real overarching message here. Yeah. But also, we're going to have a little chat about combining the consumption of alcohol and running in some capacity.
Yes, and sort of DIY adventure. That it's
most importantly, just exploring the world.
Hey, look, before we go into running wine, I've got some science for you, Ben.
Is it about wine?
It's actually not about wine.
Oh, all right, fine. Oh, I like it. I like non-wine based science too. Yeah. That's fine. Carry on.
This is about the best warm-up to do before a 5K race, which for most people listening is probably going to be parkrun. So this is a new study.
Okay,
and looks at the best way to warm up for that distance. And one warm-up involved 3 times 250 meters at 70% of VO2 max speed. Well, what that really means is 3 times 250 meters at about 10k pace.
Yes.
And the other involved these 250 meter efforts, but at more like 2k pace, 3 of them. And it found that both warm-ups lasted for about 8 to 10 minutes when you factored in a bit of rest. And it was followed by a little transition period where you do a bit of kind of sort of standing still, thinking about what you're going to do, and then a little bit of hopping and skipping if you've got the time. And it found that those who did the faster warm-up, so the warm-up that was more like 2k pace, 250 meters at 2k pace, they actually they were 6 seconds faster over 5,000 meters. It doesn't sound like a lot, but these were highly fit athletes. So it actually made a kind of a significant difference. So one to try at your next parkrun for anyone listening.
Yeah, I mean, that does sound really good. Essentially, do 250 meters of effort where you get your heart rate up.
Yeah, three times.
Because we're taking that test and extrapolating backwards from like very fit people down to anyone who wants to do a 5k.
Yeah,
you're basically talking about 250 meters of faster than 5k effort.
Exactly.
And that will be what helps you reach that next goal. Yeah. So whatever your 5k pace is, just a bit faster than that for 250 meters, and that will help you warm up effectively.
Yeah, I think it's actually something you can apply to lots of races that are maybe say sub-marathon in distance, and a lot of people don't do it. So they do a bit of jogging, and then it's like, oh, you're going to do a 10k, and then the first kilometers, this massive like shocker to your system, and you're like, oh, it feels really difficult.
Agreed. You have to do that little, basically do some not sprints, that's dramatic, but you want to really strides, feel some strides, get some real effort into the body, because it's very short-lived. So you just want to, it's basically just sort of, you're tricking yourself into thinking that you've warmed up the engine a bit, and then you're so that first K, as you say, when especially if you're going all out for a PB, you're not going in cold, which is never great.
Yeah, I've done it a few times, and it makes it so much harder if you're just going in. It's almost like, if you're getting in cold water and you didn't dip your foot in at all, you just kind of just jump straight in.
Shock.
And you were like, I'm massively, and it's a shock, and you kind of want to give up. So I think a bit more of that is good. I've actually been back to the track, Ben. So I've been practicing what I preach. Back to the track.
What a revelation! And this is all in because of your 10-mile challenge that you set yourself.
Well, yeah, that's in the background. I've had to test a few spikes for Runners World.
Of course. Hey, look, guys, forget about personal endeavour, and what comes first for me and Rick is high quality internet-based content. So he's been reviewing some spikes. So but that's just helped you along, has it?
Yeah, I mean, it's I've been lucky enough to test some of like the sort of top spikes, which I guess are kind of super spikes, but regardless of that, like just being back in a pair of spikes on the track is quite a thrill. It's quite a thrill to be back running quickly. I'm not setting the track alight in any way, but just think a little bit of injection of speed once a week. It feels extremely different to your other runs. Do you know what I mean? Where it's actually about like, you're firing up different energy systems, and it makes me feel better about the kind of runner I am generally. Just having that having that as part of the weekly routine, I think.
How much difference did it was it a stark reminder in the difference that a pair of spikes makes, or were you actually just like, yeah, these are different and better, but not like that much?
The biggest difference is obviously because the spikes are all in the forefoot, and you haven't really got a heel. Obviously naturally you'll be more kind of mid or forefoot when you're working at interval pace anyway, but you really have to do that. Like they're not forgiving in terms of like heel striking.
The calf muscles.
So I've been easing in. I've been doing like 4 or 5 reps as opposed to maybe 8 or 9, because I was like, realistically I haven't done this in a while, so it's going to be super easy to come down like enthusiastic dad and then like I didn't run for 2 months after that kind of thing. Yeah. But and I think it does something into your head, mate. Maybe you feel the same way about. I always think if you get a vest and shorts on when you go to a race, you feel fast, and I think spikes are like the next level of that, where you're like, I feel a bit like an athlete, which isn't. But you've
got spikes on your feet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I mean that's gripping the ground. I'm going to be absolutely flying along. That's like you sort of almost like a 12-year-old. If I think about how children would like sort of, well, I've got spikes on my shoes. I'm essentially a robot. This is the best thing that's ever happened. That's how I still kind of half think about it.
No, I think that's right. I do think that, again, like general tip to people is like, you can dress to feel fast, right? And whatever fast means to people is fine. But like, I think, if you're comfortable wearing a vest when it comes to a race, and like weather permitting, I really, think, like racing shorts, a vest, and some and the shoes that make you feel quick, and maybe that are nice and light, maybe.
Or maybe leopard print, Rick.
Well, yeah, that's what one of these spikes is actually. It's actually called the Endorphin Cheetah. It's by Saucony, which I feel like cheetah is a little bit of an unfortunate name for a pair of track spikes, isn't it? Sort of casting aspersions on the wearer.
Yeah, straight away. Oh no, someone didn't think about that.
They're out there. But I feel like maybe with spikes, because I'm like that. You're much more of a natty dresser than I am anyway. But I'd never buy a pair of running shoes that are pink or like really gaudy, because I just feel like that's just not who I am as a person. I just feel a bit like self-conscious of that stuff.
Yeah.
But with spikes, it seems to operate in a sort of different world. A bit like like the way sort of supercars are always like yellow or pink or red or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you know what I mean? It's sort of
100%.
It's different rules with spikes.
Yeah, it's almost like the showpiece, and they have to be as sort of like, you get bright pink or just there's always some hot colours or prints or like sort of things, and then I mean it doesn't really cross over into shoes as well. You've obviously super shoes have got like neon. Lots of bright sort of fluoro colours have always been associated with super shoes. But you're right, track spikes are always that little step above in terms of like anything goes.
Just a little bit of pop,
Because if you had a pair of leopard print, like, so what's it, Saucony Endorphin Cheetahs. So if you did Saucony Endorphin Elites, like their top end marathon shoe, and they were leopard print, would you feel the same about them?
No, I wouldn't, Ben. And I think like some of that's a practical level of like, I'd be running around the streets that I live in a pair of like cheetah print, and
true.
Some people are comfortable doing that, and I take my hat off to them, because I think they're probably more confident and secure than I am. But I just feel a bit like I just can't. I'm just not the cheetah leopard print man when it comes to shoe choice. But with the spikes, obviously, you're in a kind of sort of relatively safe, confined space, aren't you, on a track? But I think it is more than that. I think there is something about like.
I think if you're turning up to a track,
spikes on,
I think if you're turning up to a track with spikes, you've already gone past the level of shoes being an issue. You know what I mean? Like if most people going to the track won't be wearing spikes, they'll probably, they might be wearing a longer distance spike perhaps, but they'll probably just have like a decent thin performance racy shoe.
You absolutely do not need to be wearing spikes to run intervals on a track, but some people might find it gives them the little like a little mental push to for
sure
running.
I've got some coming my way. I can't wait to go out there and do that.
Take a picture, let us know. What's going on with the running then? Are you still following the slow intervals method, Ben?
No, well, yes. It's not, because I said no straight away, and that makes it sound like it was an experiment that I'm happy to ditch. When in fact it's not. It's going to be my go-to return. But I just sort of felt mildly uninspired after the sort of couple of half marathons that I had booked in and done, and the first one went well and the second one was much harder, and it sort of coincided with a period of being incredibly tired and didn't fill me with great amounts of joy. And I mean, you know, we talk about the joy of running and how it should be sort of like the bedrock of most people's running, and it kind of was, the race kind of, the angling everything towards training for races was beginning to suck a bit of the joy out, so I stopped and just carried on just doing nice running, and that's all I've been doing. I haven't really got anything else planned, just, you know, getting out there and enjoying different routes, finding different bits to run around, and that's about it. But I do still have like things I want to try and get better at, but there's just not a race at the end of it to sort of validate it,
isn't it? If it's just relentless race after relentless race, I think some people can do that, and I think that's amazing. But
I'm always in awe of that, because I sort of crave the structure that brings, but not the, I don't know, not the sort of,
you feel a bit prescribed to.
Exactly. I think that's probably it. I like having some. I like having something to aim towards, but it doesn't have to be a race. It might just be, maybe I'll get these spikes and I'll suddenly decide that I want to run my fastest 800 meters ever.
Yeah.
And I'll just go and spend a few months just working towards that and see what I can do. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, it'd be interesting from listeners to know what their goals are in the short to medium term this year. Let us know if you've got some interesting running goals coming up. Always great to hear from people. It's a podcast at runnersworld.co.uk.
All right, I think we should speak to our guest of the week.
Let's do it. 3 cheers to him.
Nice.
Guest of the week, here in the studio. Guest of the week, sometimes on the phone. Could be an athlete, could be a physio, or a complete unknown.
Colin, thanks very much. Anyway, we'll do a quick intro and go into the questions if that works for you. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, all right. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it, and that man is Colin Renton, who devoted a year to running and wine. The resultant book, The Wine Runner, chronicles a year of hard yards and vineyards, and he's here to tell us more about what he discovered along the way. So, Colin, welcome to the Runners World podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
So, can we start with, I mean, it doesn't sound like a book that would require much motivation. It's the sort of book that I think Ben and I would like to write. But in terms of yourself, why did you want to write the Wine Runner?
Well, I was approaching my 60th birthday, and I had a list of unfulfilled ambitions. One of which was to run a marathon. That's been kind of teasing me now for the best part of 40 years, and I knew that it was kind of now or never sort of thing. My job was as a corporate writer, so I was working in the corporate world, and I'd always had an ambition to write a book. I had an interest in wine, and I was keen to learn a little bit more about it. And with COVID, it kind of focused the attention a little bit more. And as the world opened up a little bit after the pandemic, it was a chance to travel to some interesting places. So this was an opportunity to combine all four of those things, really. And the 60th birthday was the real catalyst to doing the marathon part, especially.
What was the sort of like the Venn diagram of wine and running for you? What was the middle meeting point? Was it after a run you'd like a glass of wine, or was it that the wine you'd like to go places where there was nice wine and run there? How did the sort of two worlds collide?
The thing that kind of sparked it all was the Marathon du Medoc in Bordeaux, where you actually run and drink wine at the same time, and that was So it was when I started to research that I found another couple of. I found one in Moldova, which actually is an underground 10K that goes through wine cellars, and then I found a half marathon in Germany that goes along the side of the Rhine, which is kind of winemaking country. And then I thought, there's more of this than I realised. So when I started to do a bit more research, I realised that there was actually quite a lot in various places. So that was when it kind of struck me that if I could find 12 different countries where they do runs that are either wine runs or somehow associated with wine, then I could put together this kind of 12-month schedule. Somewhere just in a place that's renowned as a winemaking area. So I kind of did the run and then found a place to go and do a wine tasting. In others, it was because it was a big wine area. Prosecco, for example, in Italy, where I thought, yeah, you've got to kind of go there. Is there a run that you can do? And as it happens, there's a thing called the Prosecco run that it was a perfect fit. My only real requirements were it had to be a run and a place where you could do some wine tasting. And if you could do the two together, well, hey ho, do that.
Yeah, that's a bonus. Yeah. So you didn't do any kind of Marathon du Medoc wine on the run, or did you experiment with that? And what was that like, if so?
Yeah, the first one I did actually was a half marathon distance in Switzerland, and it was quite the running part of it was quite low key. So I turned up at the start, and people were turning up in their hiking gear, so they were obviously out for a walk rather than for a run, and it was 22k, and every 5k you came to a feeding station, but the feeding station was literally a feeding station. So you actually sat down and you had some food and 2 glasses of wine. So by the time we got to the end of the half marathon, we'd eaten 4 plates of food and drunk 8 glasses of wine.
This is incredible. What's it called? Tell us the name of this race, please.
It's called the Marathon. It's du Saveur, Saveur. It's in a place called Sion. In Switzerland, and it goes up into the hills. I mean, there were bits of it that were quite tough, but obviously you became less aware of that as the thing progressed. And then there were others. The one in Italy where it was quite a tough. It was about 11k. It was quite a tough run. It was really quite muddy. At one point, we were running down this hill, and there was a big, just a heap of bodies at the bottom of the hill. People just gathering, and I thought someone had fallen or something. And it turned out they were actually all just standing there drinking Prosecco. There's a Prosecco producer at the bottom of the hill handing out glasses of wine.
Did you find, have you sort of managed to whittle it down to sort of the best wine to have when running? I mean, Prosecco doesn't sound, anything with fizz, I think, has got to be ruled out like straight away. It's just...
No, there's no sort of best. It's just like saying what's the best wine. Really, it's up to an individual, I suppose. But I discovered some excellent wines that I wouldn't have known about. So, Hungarian wine and Belgian wine and Slovenian wine, which you can't find in your local wine shop. So I discovered some of that kind of thing where you think, yeah, there's a whole world out there that wine drinkers in the UK are not really aware of.
Were you aware of the kind of long history of alcohol and endurance exercise? I think it was Victorians who kind of looked at it as, you'd have a glass of wine doing a marathon would be quite a standard procedure.
Yeah, when I was doing some research ahead of the project, I realised that was the performance enhancing substance of its day. I think people used to do that. The history behind wine running was that, or at least the story goes that the history behind it is that it started in France, and it was vineyard owners encouraged their staff to get fit for the harvest. Right. So they ran round the vineyards, and obviously at that time I think people just drank wine with all of their meals in France. So you ran round the vineyard and then stopped for your lunch and drank a bottle of wine. And I think that was kind of the history behind the whole thing, and it's kind of grown a bit. So there's almost like a hidden world out there of wine running. as I say, some of it is just happens to take place in areas where people make wine. Others, it forms part of the run itself.
We had a team day out that involved some running and wine tasting, which was lovely. We were down on the North Down. Where were we, Rick? North Down, South.
Yeah, it was Denbies on the North Downs. It's interesting because obviously England is now a kind of wine, like legitimate winemaking nation. Did that play a part in your travels? Did you think no?
Yeah, Denbies in fact was. What I did was I tried to find one run per month, and on those months when there was nothing actually on the formal calendar that I could find, I actually used park runs to slot in, because it's a good way to kind of fill a blank on the calendar. And one of the park runs is at Denbies. It actually runs through the vines. So I did that. So I went down there on, it was, I actually probably did it the wrong way round, and I did the tasting on the Friday and the run on the Saturday. But really interesting tasting. But the week before I did it, I think the Surrey Cross Country Championships had been run down there. Yeah, and the place had been dug up. The course itself was really, really muddy, and it was quite soft underfoot that morning. So I actually found the going quite tough, but I'm not sure how much of that was down to the conditions and how much was down to the fact that I'd done tasting the day before.
This is the Runner's World podcast.
You give me an idea for a new book. I think we call it Park Rum, and it could just be going around sort of tasting rum at various parks.
Nice.
Maybe that's
yeah, there's an idea. Yeah.
Do you find there's a real connection between the sort of geography and landscape that is good for wine and landscape that becomes good for running?
I think a good example of that is probably in Spain, where I did a half marathon in Jerez, which is the kind of big sherry country, and there's a special kind of clay that they have a name for the clay that they grow their vines in, and around Jerez, most of the vines are on the hills, but just kind of looking down into the town. So just by default, it becomes quite a tough course because it's going to be hilly, and it happened to have been a rare few days of quite heavy rain, so it was quite tough going as well. I guess that if you'd been doing it on the back of maybe a couple of weeks of really dry conditions, it would have been a completely different thing. And if you ran at a different time of day, I guess you'd got the sun on your back instead of it being slightly overcast. And yeah, you're right. Obviously, the fact that most or many vines are grown so that they catch the sun. If you're actually running through the vines, the likelihood is it's going to be quite tough to run through.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's likely to be quite hilly.
I'm interested in this idea of a kind of DIY adventure, and particularly one where, like you say, you're approaching your 60th birthday, so it's like you're not you're not a youthful runner anymore. I don't want that to sound offensive, but but I love the idea that you can come up with this stuff slightly later in life and have a go at it. But in terms of like your own experience of that, like what was that like to discover? Have you done anything like this before?
No, I mean I've organised trips and holidays and things, but nothing on this scale. And it was kind of initially, as I said, it was I had one marathon in mind, and it was only when I started to look at that I realised that all of these other things were going on, and there was a whole world out there that I didn't know about. I kind of knew there would be problems as well, that as we were coming out of COVID, so there was always a chance that a country would lock down again, and or that I would be injured or ill, or races would be cancelled, as was the case. So all of these things happened at various points. And I didn't want to deviate from this idea of having 12 different countries. So that kind of meant that I needed to have more than 12 options, so that I had something to slot in if any of these things happened. I hadn't done anything like, as I say, on that scale before.
I find there's a real wines that I now will go to in the shop that I really enjoy always have an association with an area that I've enjoyed running around. So like being on holiday, or particularly I now really enjoy like Primitivo, because I've been to Puglia a few times and I've run around there, and you sort of get a taste for the region that you've been in, and you sort of, and that's all of a sudden that there's a real close association with, I guess, the taste of a holiday and then an experience, and how and then you bring that back with you. Do you still have that now? Can you do sort of that association of taste and region and running experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think once I've done what I did, that's always going to be the case. That if I go out for a meal with my wife or something, and we say, right, well, let's have a look at the Austrian wines and see if any of these are the ones that I had when I did the marathon in Austria, or something maybe slightly obscure, that a Hungarian wine or something, which I probably wouldn't have looked at before. Is probably something. Oh yeah, that's made from the same grapes as the one that I brought back. So, I mean, at the end of the year, I was left with a case of wine. So I literally did have like 12 bottles of wine.
Oh, great!
One from each of the trips that I had, which I actually have to say I still have. But I haven't actually drunk them yet. Good. But I've got to find a suitable occasion to do so.
Do you have a favourite wine experience from the 12? If you had to say which was the best?
Yeah, I mean, it maybe wasn't necessarily the best wine, but the biggest eye opener was Belgium, which I just didn't have down as a winemaking country at all. I was doing a run in it was Descente de la Laisse, which is a kind of trail run. And there's a kind of half marathon distance and a 12k, and I did the shorter of the two. And it was in this town, and there was a woman winemaker who had only just started making wine about sort of less than 10 years ago. She was a Dutch woman who had moved to this area to basically ease back from her. She had a busy life, to take a step back. Bought a house, and there was a field in front of it, and she was worried that someone would buy the field and build something. So she thought, what am I going to do here? So she planted some vines, and over the years she started to make wine, which is now served in Michelin-starred restaurants across Belgium.
Wow.
And I travelled on that. A lot of them I travelled on my own, but on that particular occasion I went with one of my mates and we were doing the run. And so we'd arranged to go for to meet this woman, and she was a phenomenon. She was just a force of nature, and we were in there for about 3 hours, and she kept going, try this one, and she kept producing other bottles of wine, and in the end, I came away thinking, how come we've never heard of Belgian wine before?
Right.
It was a really interesting experience.
I think that would be the biggest thing, is that it would help you step away from, again, the comfort zones of where you run, and also the comfort zones of just walking that aisle in the supermarket and going, I know that France, Italy and Australia make these wines, and I'm just going to have those, and that's it. And actually, you sort of, as with all these things, it's good to explore and to have a bit of more variety.
Yeah, I mean, the Hungarian one was interesting. The actual run, that was a kind of one where I kind of pieced it together myself. The run itself was in Budapest, and it was a night run where the runners wear head torches, and it was through the streets of the city. Started at 10 p.m, so it was slightly cooler, and you ran across, when you finished the run, somebody sort of thrust this bottle of wine into your hand, and you think, this is the last thing I want right now.
Yeah.
But, I did a separate tasting, and it was a guy who he'd worked as a sommelier in America, and he was a Hungarian guy, come back, and he worked with lots of small Hungarian winemakers. And the interesting part of it was that when Hungary was under communist rule, the winemakers were encouraged to produce volume rather than quality, so they were producing tons of really poor wine. And since the demise of communism they have kind of worked to improve the quality, and there's now lots of sort of second generation winemakers. So it's people who are in their sort of 30s and 40s that are producing really high quality wine, and it's on a quite a sharp upward trajectory. So it's probably something that we'll hear a bit more about. But some of the stories behind the I wasn't entirely sold on the way that some of these wine oligarchs had acquired their vineyards over during the recent past.
Yeah, I did the Budapest Marathon actually. That's my first marathon, and it's hard to beat. It's incredible. It's a beautiful city. It's very flat as well, and I'd happily go back, but it's sort of off the radar still, which is interesting.
Yeah.
If people want to find out a bit more about the Wine Runner, it's out now, isn't it? But where's the best place people could go and pick up a copy if they like what they've heard?
It's available in Waterstones, Toppings, other small bookshops, and it's on Amazon as well. It's called The Wine Runner: My Year of Hard Yards and Vineyards.
That's great. I think a lot of listeners are they'll find a lot to enjoy in that book, and I think even just discovering which races you did is reason enough to go and get a copy.
Yeah, well, I've listed at the back of the book. There is a list of each of the races and the websites for those races, and I've also added a wine list, which is the 12 bottles that I have in my case.
Well, Colin, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for coming on to the Runners World podcast, giving us an insight into running and wine. We're off to go and buy a bottle of the Hungarian stuff, and I think Ben liked the sound of the Belgian. So
good stuff.
Great. So that brings us to the end of this week's Runners World podcast. A huge thanks to our guest Colin Renton, and to you, of course, for listening.
You can subscribe to 3 issues of Runners World for just £5. Head to runnersworld.com/UK/podcast offer to get this exclusive listener offer. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please subscribe if you haven't already. You can find it in all the usual places. Just search Runners World UK. Just share it with your friends. Make sure there's listening. Go through the back catalogue. Loads of really excellent episodes. Like, we've done 230 now, so there's bound to be some that you've missed. So you should have a quick look through those. And you'll hear from us again next week.